Picture this, a candlelit courtroom somewhere in late medieval Europe. A woman stands trial for witchcraft, accused of stealing men's bodies through spells and keeping them as enchanted tokens in a bird's nest. Across the square, a farmer and a pig face trial together for an unholy crime, and both await the same verdict, purification by fire. The scene feels impossible, yet it was real, recorded in the dusty archives of a civilization that mixed law with faith and faith with fear. Welcome to a world where morality was public theater, where the church dictated not only what people believed, but when and how they could express their most private instincts. The Middle Ages were obsessed with control, of the body, of desire, of the imagination itself. In a society ruled by priests and kings, even intimacy had a schedule. Medieval Christians lived under a divine timetable that made passion a matter of calculation. No intimacy on Sundays, the Lord's Day. None on Fridays for Christ's death. None on Thursdays to honor the Last Supper, Lent, Advent, and the countless feast days of saints carved away more of the calendar until only a few nights each month remained unsanctioned. Even then, the act was to be brief, silent, and purely functional, a duty, not a joy. Church writings insisted that love must be chaste, even within marriage. Perform it as if compelled by necessity alone, one bishop wrote, without laughter, without joy, and without pleasure. Yet in this society that condemned desire, the same clergy who enforced such laws often failed to follow them. Brothels operated across Europe with the church's quiet permission, some literally owned by bishops. In London, they were called the Bishop of Winchester's geese, licensed and taxed under clerical authority. Sin became revenue and penance became policy. The church's effort to suppress lust only made it more present, written, recorded, confessed, punished, and monetized. It wasn't hypocrisy so much as an attempt to control chaos through rules, to impose divine logic on human impulse. Monks preached restraint from the pulpit, then confessed their own weakness by candlelight. In monasteries and convents, scandals unfolded behind walls meant for prayer, and each was reframed not as corruption, but as purification. In the medieval mind, punishment cleansed the soul. Suffering made holiness visible. That conviction extended into medicine, where doctors tried to explain love and desire through philosophy rather than biology. Drawing from Aristotle and Galen, they imagined a universe of humors and spirits, where women and men each produced vital fluids necessary for conception. From this two-seed theory came a horrifying legal assumption. If pregnancy required mutual pleasure, then a pregnant woman could not have been unwilling. Court records across Europe document cases where assault victims were disbelieved because they conceived. Their own bodies turned into evidence against them. Medicine and morality merged into a system that punished both sin and symptom. Yet paradoxically, the same physicians warned that abstinence could make women sick. Their wombs, they claimed, might wander within the body, pressing on the heart or brain, causing melancholy or hysteria. The cure, prescribed with utter sincerity, was marriage or stimulation to balance the humors. These contradictions reveal the heart of medieval thought, an era that saw desire as both sacred and dangerous, something to regulate but never fully understood. Law was no less strange. Trials often bordered on performance art. Rituals meant to reaffirm divine justice rather than discover truth. Among the most surreal was the trial by Congress, ordered when a woman sought annulment on grounds of her husband's impotence. Courts in France and parts of Italy required proof, public humiliating proof. The couple would be examined by matrons, then ordered to attempt the act behind curtains while witnesses stood nearby. The result, whatever it was, became law. Elsewhere, punishments for infidelity or moral crimes were deliberately visible. Adulterous women lost noses or ears, marks meant to erase beauty and advertise sin. Justice was spectacle, physical, moral, and theatrical. Even animals were not spared the reach of human judgment. Medieval courts tried pigs, goats, and donkeys for crimes ranging from murder to immorality, assigning them lawyers, calling witnesses to testify to their character, and reading formal verdicts before executing them. In 1386, a sow in France was dressed in human clothing and burned at the stake for killing a child. The act was absurd but symbolically potent. To medieval minds, sin was contagious. Moral infection required purification through ritual. The animal burned not for guilt, but to cleanse the community. Beneath the superstition lay genuine belief in cosmic order, in a moral universe where even beasts could offend heaven. As time passed, the line between moral panic and supernatural fear blurred. In 1487, inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger published the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, a book obsessed not with sorcery, but with the body. It claimed that witches could steal vitality, that they desecrated fertility through magic, that temptation itself was witchcraft. Accused women were rarely condemned for spells alone. They were accused of wielding the one power men feared most, control over reproduction, life, and pleasure. The witch became the embodiment of chaos, woman ungoverned by man or church, symbol of nature's wildness. Witch trials were less about magic than they were about moral order, an attempt to burn the world's unexplainable desires into submission. And while fear ruled doctrine, profit ruled the cities. Urban Europe ran on managed sin. Municipal brothels flourished openly, staffed, regulated, and taxed. In Nuremberg, the city council set rules for attire, holidays, and customer behavior. In London's Southwark, the church collected taxes from its own establishments, declaring them a necessary evil that preserved virtue by providing an outlet. Yet the balance collapsed in 1494, when a new disease swept across Europe, a sickness that disfigured faces and terrified doctors. The church called it punishment. Physicians called it plague. We know it now as syphilis. Within months, the brothels closed, the pragmatic tolerance of vice vanished, and medieval sexuality itself retreated into fear. Artists began painting lovers as corpses, beauty as decay, desire as doom. The body, once seen as God's masterpiece, became a reminder of mortality. By the dawn of the 16th century, the medieval system of moral control had devoured itself. For centuries, the church, the law, and medicine had tried to discipline desire, to make the uncontrollable logical, the private public, the sacred measurable. But no calendar, no penitential, no decree could change the truth of human nature. People loved, longed, and transgressed despite the rules. And so the world that tried to suppress passion became defined by it, in its art, its rituals, and its myths. What endures is not the strangeness of their customs, but their humanity. Their contradictions mirror our own: fear of temptation, fascination with scandal, moral panic disguised as piety. Every age finds a way to judge the body. The Middle Ages simply painted it in fire and shadow. When we read their laws and trials now, it's tempting to laugh at their absurdity. Monks taxing sin, doctors theorizing about wandering wombs, judges debating purity like accountants of the soul. But beneath the absurdity lies something familiar. They, too, struggled to reconcile instinct and belief, nature and rule, freedom and control. The medieval world's fear of desire wasn't primitive. It was human. Their rituals were grotesque mirrors of our own attempts to sanitize what makes us uncomfortable. They tried to legislate the heart, and found, as we always do, that the heart obeys no law. In the end, the story of medieval sexuality isn't about filth or fanaticism. It's about the endless tension between faith and flesh, between the ideals that elevate us and the impulses that define us. The chronicles of those centuries reveal people both cruel and devout, absurd and sincere, terrified and yearning. They remind us that civilization at any age is built not on purity, but on the struggle to contain what cannot be contained. The cathedrals and the courthouses, the trials and the decrees, all were monuments to a fear older than any creed, the fear of ourselves. And so, as the candlelight of the Middle Ages flickers out, we are left not with monsters or saints, but with people, fragile, contradictory, and achingly human. As the 15th century faded into the 16th, Europe's obsession with sin did not vanish. It evolved. The great cathedrals still towered over cities, but their shadows now reached deeper into the human soul. After centuries of regulating when and how people could touch each other, the church discovered a new frontier of control: the mind. If desire could not be conquered in the flesh, it could be hunted in thought. And so began what historians call the Age of Confession. Confession, at first a sacrament, became an industry. Parish priests urged their flocks to speak every impulse, every dream, every private trespass aloud. Manuals circulated detailing hundreds of questions to ask penitents, not to absolve them, but to identify what they might be hiding. Did you think impurely upon your neighbor's wife? Did you experience delight in sinful imagination? Did you touch yourself without need? Did you see another's shame and feel pleasure? The questions grew longer, more invasive, more detailed, until the act of confessing became an act of recollection, of imagining sin in order to describe it. The paradox was complete. To purge sin, one had to visualize it. To destroy temptation, one had to relive it. The medieval church had built a moral labyrinth so intricate that no one could escape it without first walking through the darkness. And yet confession had power. For the first time, ordinary people were asked not just to obey, but to reflect. A peasant, kneeling on the cold floor before his priest, was forced to articulate guilt in language once reserved for kings and theologians. In that strange intimacy, a new kind of self-awareness was born, the seed of modern conscience. But conscience in the medieval imagination was never private. It belonged to God and, by extension, to those who claimed to speak for him. As confession culture spread, the line between sin and suspicion blurred further. The Inquisition, originally a legal system to investigate heresy, became a mechanism to expose impurity of every kind. Records from Spain, Italy, and France show interrogations that read like moral autopsies. Accused heretics were questioned not only about belief, but about desire, what they thought during prayer, what dreams they remembered, what fantasies crossed their mind in solitude. To the Inquisitor, thoughts were not private. They were evidence. The result was a world where guilt existed before the crime, and confession was both the cure and the weapon. This obsession with purity seeped into politics as well. Monarchs discovered that morality could unify empires more effectively than swords. After all, an army could kill bodies, but purity could conquer souls. The Spanish monarchy, newly triumphant after centuries of war, declared itself the champion of divine order. Queen Isabella, the same ruler whose vow had once chained her to her own decay, now turned her personal penance into national policy. The expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Spain was justified not merely as politics, but as purification. In a single decree, millions were uprooted, centuries of coexistence burned away under the holy fire of moral certainty. From Spain, the logic spread like contagion. France, Italy, and the German states followed, tightening laws against moral corruption. Brothels that had once paid taxes were shuttered or driven underground. Physicians, once prescribing pleasure as medicine, now warned that lust was the gateway of pestilence. Even art, once a space of transcendence, began to mirror repression. Paintings of saints in ecstasy became cautionary tales, their rapture mistaken for sin. Sculptors softened the bodies of angels, clothing them in flowing drapery to avoid temptation by marble. The human form, once divine, became dangerous again, but repression does not erase desire, it distorts it. When the church forced intimacy into secrecy, secrecy transformed into obsession. Underground literature, handwritten, copied, whispered, began to circulate through cities like Venice, Florence, and Paris. Books of love, anatomy, and satire disguised as moral treatises appeared under aliases. The same presses that printed Bibles also printed the first works of erotic poetry. Beneath the veneer of piety, the Renaissance was quietly rediscovering the body and celebrating it. Still, the tension between holiness and flesh refused to disappear. In monasteries and convents, the Inquisition's presence turned confession into surveillance. Nuns were asked to describe dreams and temptations in detail to prove their faith. Priests documented their penitents' struggles in Latin ledgers, some clinical, others disturbingly fascinated. Reading those accounts today feels like eavesdropping on centuries of repressed longing disguised as virtue. In one Spanish record from 1507, an inquisitor describes a young novice who claimed she was visited by the Virgin Mary each night, enveloped in divine warmth. The priest wrote that she trembled and wept with joy, her body seized by grace. Yet in the margins, another hand added a note: the symptoms may not be spiritual but carnal. That single annotation sealed her fate. The girl vanished from the records after that entry, most likely transferred to isolation, her vision reclassified as sin. Such cases show how thin the line had become between holiness and hysteria. The very intensity of belief that once defined medieval devotion was now evidence of danger, and so Europe entered a new phase, not of ignorance, but of paranoia. The Protestant Reformation, often remembered as a revolt of faith, was also a revolt of the body. Martin Luther's challenge to Rome began not only with theology, but with disgust at hypocrisy, the selling of indulgences, the trafficking of guilt. He rejected the notion that salvation could be earned by payment or by pain. "Marriage is honorable," he wrote, "and the marriage bed undefiled." In one stroke, centuries of celibacy as moral ideal began to crumble. But even this liberation was double-edged. Where the Catholic Church had imposed abstinence, Protestant reformers imposed discipline. Pleasure was not sinful, but it must be contained within duty. The individual, now free from Rome, became accountable to his own conscience, a new kind of inner jailer. From this paradox arose a distinctly modern morality, outwardly freer, inwardly more anxious. The medieval sinner feared public punishment. The modern one feared himself. That shift, from external law to internal guilt, is one of the most profound inheritances of the Middle Ages. By the 17th century, Europe's relationship with sexuality had fractured completely. On one side, the Enlightenment began to study the body scientifically, dissecting anatomy with curiosity rather than shame. On the other, the Church, stripped of political dominance but still powerful in culture, doubled down on chastity as identity. Priests no longer burned heretics, but they still ruled confessionals. The age of fire had become the age of whispers, and yet, beneath the silence, traces of the old world remained. The rituals, the fears, the language of purity, all survived, repackaged. The witch hunts of the Renaissance gave way to the moral panics of later centuries. What the Inquisitors once called demonic possession, physicians would rename hysteria. What the priests once labeled lust, psychologists would call repression. The vocabulary changed, but the wound stayed the same. Looking back, it's tempting to pity the people of the Middle Ages, their superstition, their ignorance. But perhaps what makes their world haunting is not how different it was, but how recognizable. They lived in a constant negotiation between faith and instinct, order and chaos. They built vast institutions to manage what could never be controlled. The longing to feel, to touch, to be human without fear. And in doing so, they left behind a mirror. That mirror still reflects us. Every society constructs its own theology of purity, whether through religion, medicine, or culture. We may no longer hold public trials for desire, but we conduct them silently, through judgment and shame. The medieval calendar of forbidden days has been replaced by invisible algorithms dictating what is acceptable, what must remain unseen, what is safe to show. We no longer call it sin, we call it policy. If the Middle Ages were a theater of faith, our age is a theater of perception. They feared the body. We fear being seen. The same anxiety, rephrased in new languages, and yet, despite all repression, the human story endures. Even in the darkest centuries, people loved. They wrote letters, poems, songs of longing. They held each other in secret and called it divine. Beneath the hierarchy of bishops and kings, life persisted, raw, messy, stubbornly beautiful. A peasant couple whispering prayers before bed, believing their love was a sin but touching anyway. A monk confessing his weakness not to defy God but to feel human again. A woman praying to a saint because she had no one else to speak to about her desires. These moments, lost to history, are more revealing than all decrees combined. By the time the Renaissance dawned fully, the world had changed beyond recognition. The printing press multiplied ideas faster than censors could destroy them. Anatomical drawings replaced mystical diagrams. The same Europe that once burned women for knowing herbs now painted the naked form in cathedrals. The pendulum had swung, from repression to revelation, from shame to celebration. But that transformation carried scars. The centuries of fear had left an imprint on the collective psyche.